Hi everybody, this is Mike Miller and welcome to Go Carolinas. Today I'm here in Greenville, South Carolina with Kimilee Bryant. Kimilee is a, would I say retired or just former?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
She is, has been a well-known singer on Broadway for many years. Sang in Phantom of the Opera among other shows, and relocated to Greenville about 8 years ago. So, Kimilee, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't think I'll probably ever be able to retire. Not that I necessarily want to, but yeah. No, I'm still going strong, singing all over the place. But yes, I am doing a lot more teaching these days here in Greenville because as much as we love upstate Carolinas, there aren't as many opportunities for professional performers here. So I'm trying to help change that though with a theater company. My sister and I started a few years ago, but it's tricky because we do have a lot of great, theater companies, but we don't have union companies. And fortunately and unfortunately, I am a member of the stage union, the Actors Equity Union, as well as the AGMA, all the unions. And even though we are a right to work state, it's tricky. It's tricky, and a lot of the directors around town don't want to get too involved or mess with that. There is one theater in upstate, which is called the Warehouse Theater, where I have worked, and I know you can't see it over there, but there are a couple of posters on my wall over there of a couple of shows I did do with the Warehouse a few years ago. One of them was Master Class, where I then played the student. I'm ready to play the teacher now, and then Tally's Folly, but I was able to do those with a union contract. So that theater can do contract for me. It's not Broadway money, but that's okay. I know, I understand that. I also don't pay Broadway rent or New York City rent now. So
I understand. Yeah, before we get too much into that, can we just go back to, you grew up in Greenville?
I grew up in Greenville.
Tell us about growing up in Greenville and how you got into music.
Sure. I grew up over here on this side of Greenville where Furman is. So we kind of was sort of the northwest area. I went to Travelers Rest High School. My mother was a dance teacher for 50 plus years here in Greenville. She's taught so many people and now they're all over the place because when I would go on tour, I would get a call or a message from someone who had been a student of my mom's. So I started out as a dancer, but both my mom and dad took voice lessons from a very well-known teacher here in Greenville called Iva Dixon. Iva, we used to call her Iva the Driver. But she had been Juilliard trained, and she was pretty much the only voice teacher in town. Maybe there were a couple of others, but she was certainly the most well-known and connected to Greenville Theater, which was called the Greenville Little Theater. So my parents sent me there I believe I started when I was 11, officially taking voice lessons. Took piano a little bit, and continued with my dance training all through high school. And then I went to the Fine Arts Center my senior year of high school. I also went to the Governor's School of the Arts. So back then you could do both. Now I think that's a choice. I guess you could do both, but you can't do them at the same time. Governor's School back then was only a summer program. So I did it in the summer. And I was there the first year they added music, which was the second year ever for the Governor's School. So I was able to be a part of that. The singing Christmas tree. So I did everything you could do. If it was singing, if it was getting on stage, I was there. Choir at my home church, but also a big church here in town that had one of the biggest music programs in the United States. I was a big part of that, and we went on choir tours, and so I really kind of cut my teeth and got my nerves out by doing that. And then, of course, there was the whole pageant thing, which is a whole other subject. So
yeah, you were Miss South Carolina, right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So my grandmother sort of got me into that when I was really young. I used to go with her and a couple of her friends. I called them the Golden Girls. And I was probably around 8 or so. I started going to these pageants with them, and I would notice, the most talent. I was really connected, of course, to the talent competition. And I would notice where they went to school. I was very observant. And I also felt like, well, I want to get up there and do that. But I was, again, the talent competition is what drew me to those pageants. But because I grew up here in the South and we didn't have as many opportunities, like I said, I did everything you could do that was singing or on stage. but we didn't have as much then. So pageants were sort of an outlet for me to get up on stage and do my thing, you know. So I also got a lot of scholarship money doing that too, so that was very helpful, especially for graduate school.
Okay. And so you went to Converse?
I went to Converse, now Converse University, as you know, and I was awarded the Daniel Music Scholarship. If you followed that, I don't even know if that is the same now, but that was their top music scholarships that they handed out to a few people each year, and that was really helpful. I went there primarily to study with Jane Rolandi Gray. I'd heard great things about her and her daughter, who we talked about earlier, Jana Rolandi, who was quite famous at the time, singing at City Opera and around the world. Although when I was younger, because I grew up over here in Greenville near Furman, I really wanted to go to Furman, and Furman has a great music department, and I feel like I would have done well at Furman. I had a lot of friends that went to Furman, but Converse sort of wooed me a little bit, which was nice. And I loved my time at Converse, and I had great training. As I ventured on to graduate school in New York City, I was always told by my teachers and faculty there, wow, you had some great training. And Converse wasn't as well known. It was a smaller school, but there were a lot of people from Converse that went on to where I went to school, Manhattan School of Music, who went on to Juilliard, who went on to other Cincinnati Conservatory, other music schools. So if they didn't know about Converse, then they knew about it for sure later on. We might have a visitor come over here, and she's definitely, she's looking for me at the piano bench. She's wondering why I'm not over there. I'm in the crook of the piano, which is where I prefer to be, actually. But here she comes. This is Gypsy. I don't know if you can see her on camera. I'll see if I can get her.
Hello, Gypsy.
Come on. She doesn't hear anymore. But Gypsy, if you can't see her, she's a Shih Tzu, and she was sort of named for both the opera Carmen and the musical Gypsy. Here she is, because drag her up here. Oh, there she goes. Okay, there she is. She needs a haircut. So does Mom. So she was sort of named for both the musical Gypsy and the opera Carmen, because she's a crossover girl like me. I still love to sing opera, and I still love my musical theater. So anyway, so if you hear a little pitter patter, that's who it is. But I'll just keep her here.
And you sang some operas at Converse, I assume? I know they do a lot of opera.
Yes, we didn't, it's interesting. The time I was there, I don't know why, we were focused a lot on Gilbert and Sullivan, which is interesting because I ended up doing a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan in my career. So Gilbert and Sullivan, for those of you that don't know, Gilbert and Sullivan, kind of a prerequisite to musical theater, but operetta, and those, the British guys, and very light comic operetta. And I remember us doing the Gondoliers when I was there. We did the Merry Widow, which is not Gilbert and Sullivan, but still kind of an operetta. And then my senior year, we did not do an opera. We did a musical called The Boyfriend, which had to do with a women's college or a women's boarding school. So it was appropriate because at that time we were mostly women at the university. We had a lot of guys in the music department and the music school, thank goodness, for our productions, and also they just added a lot to our education. But yeah, I think now they're able to do a lot more. Mozart, Puccini, we didn't get to do as much of that when I was there. However, we did a lot of opera scenes. We did opera scenes program usually in that winter term. And I remember us doing a good hefty portion of Dialogues of the Carmelites by Poulenc. And then fast forward, I ended up at Manhattan School of Music and we did the full opera there. So I already had some background and some experience with Dialogues of the Carmelites.
Okay. So from Manhattan, did you stayed in New York after that to start working?
25 years, just until a few years ago.
Okay.
Now, I say that, but of course, I was also on tour. I did a young artist program with an opera company, Portland Opera. I spent a year in Switzerland, and I was on tour a year and then back, but I was based in New York all that time.
What was your first show or good gig that you had?
It was actually Gilbert and Sullivan. It was Iolanthe by Gilbert and Sullivan, and it was the first sort of non-school production I guess I had done. And I'll never forget it because I fell almost immediately. My heel on my shoe broke. I didn't fall, the heel on my shoe broke, and that caused me to fall. And I had to skip down these steps. And so instead of skipping in the steps, I went kind of on my bottom. And I remember the conductor, and hopefully you're able to see this, for those of you who are watching on YouTube or other places, the conductor just stopped. He didn't know what to do. And my line, after I finished the little song on my bottom, was, and I think my scene partner helped me up. And I'm walking around. I still didn't realize that it was my shoe that was broken. I thought the stage was broken or something, because it's an out-of-body experience, you know. And I see the conductor looking like, oh my gosh, is she okay? I could just sort of read his mind. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And my line was, I'll never forget it, but oh, Streffen, I tremble at the step I'm taking. So I just made that a big, at the step I'm taking. And the conductor just laughed, the audience laughed, everybody knew I was okay. So that was my first professional gig outside of school. And then after that was Phantom and lots of other things. So.
Well, okay, well, obviously you don't just jump into Phantom without...
Kind of did.
Did you? Yeah, so tell us how that came about.
Because I was young, so
okay.
I kind of did... Well, I say that, but I did do... I went from the Gilbert and Sullivan, and then I went into a young artist program with Portland Opera. And so again, if you guys, some of your listeners probably are familiar with that term because they're music people, but a young artist program in an opera company, very similar to some apprentice programs or internship. So it's like an internship. So you get paid something. So you're doing the job. So it's an in-between school and being professional. Again, it's sort of like an internship, young artist program. So they usually are young. It usually is right after college or graduate school. So I was around 26, I said, or so. I did take a year off because Miss South Carolina, you had to take a year off for all of the appearances, or
okay.
I might have been even younger when I started. So I was out in Portland, Oregon for about 9 months, I guess. While I was out there, I was asked to audition for the Broadway company of the Phantom of the Opera. Now, they had seen me once before, and so I kind of got put on a list, I guess you could say. And I'm not even sure, I maybe had auditioned for the tour, but they were all the same casting people. And I was on the West Coast, and I was performing. We would do these school performances of Hansel and Gretel. Sometimes we took on smaller roles in the main stage operas. And I was supposed to do a smaller role in Verdi, Don Carlo, and in the short version of it that we were taking to school, sort of previews. Well, thankfully they said we can cut your part, so that I could go to San Francisco, closest place, to do my audition for Phantom. And so that audition lasted quite a while. They had me do everything possible. I practically did the whole show. I sang, I think I sang Baby Doe aria, so an aria in English, very high. I sang Glitter and Be Gay, also very high coloratura stuff. And then I sang stuff from the show. I sang Think of Me, Wishing, and then I did what we call the dressing room scene, which is the only part where Christine actually speaks, because Phantom is sung through much like an opera. But then they also had me do what are called the melismas. And so if you know the show and the title song, The Phantom of the Opera, I'm gonna have to make Gypsy. She doesn't hear anymore, so this won't hurt her, but the melismas are, and there's high C, high C, high C, or is it C sharp? I have to think of the key. Anyway, you end up on a high E. And so they wanted to see that I could do that, which I had already shown them with these other arias, but they made me do it all. So I kind of felt good that they're spending a lot of time with me. I think I have a good chance. And I walked out of the audition and people were looking at me. They were not happy, and the other people auditioning, because I guess they knew, wow, that she's probably going to get this gig. And sure enough, the next day I was back in Portland and I was at the gym. And that time we did not have cell phones. It was the 90s, before everybody had a cell phone. And I think my roommate called the gym and said, you need to call your agent. And so I was at the gym at a payphone, and that's how I found out. And I was just doing cartwheels all over the locker room at the gym, so I was very excited. But I did have to leave my internship, Young Artist Program, a little bit early. So they had to find somebody to take over a couple of things for me.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point of a program like that, is to get you a job.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think they were okay with it because they did have me back later to do something with them later.
So when you first went to Phantom, were you in the chorus, or did you?
I was the understudy. I was the understudy for Christine. So unless you're the alternate or a standby, because there's different little categories of the lingo is different, and it's slightly different in opera. So I was an understudy for Christine. So if you're an understudy, most of the time you're also in the ensemble. So I had to learn the track, as we call it, for the ensemble, which was called the Mirror Bride. Even though you did a whole lot more things besides that Mirror Bride. I had to learn that in 4 days. And of course I could only rehearse in the afternoon because they had performances at night. So I would come and watch the performances, and sometimes I would what we call trail backstage, so you could see, because there's a whole other thing that you have to learn that's not on stage. You have to learn all the backstage traffic, where you go to change into this costume, where you go to get your microphone, your wig. It's a whole thing. And then if later on in that show I became a swing, and so I had to learn all of that for about 10 or 12 different tracks. So at first I was just learning the one, kind of learning the show. Then I went on in that role, that track, the next Monday. We always started on Mondays in that show. I think their schedule's a little different now, but and then on Tuesday I started rehearsing for Christine. So then I had to immediately start learning Christine.
Now, when you go to rehearse for Christine, I guess, I mean, obviously I don't know that much about Broadway. I've never been on a Broadway show, but they don't stop the show to rehearse, right? You just kind of work your way.
That's what I'm saying. I didn't get to rehearse at night. I could only rehearse. That's why you learn it really fast. Okay. But I mean, it was my only job. Okay. I mean, there are some people that try to have other work outside the theater, but you are, even if you're not called to rehearsal, you could be called at any time, no matter what role you play, whether you are the Phantom or you're, the second spear holder from the right, who usually is a cover for the Phantom. But you can be called Tuesday through Friday from around 1 to 5. That's usually, at least in that show, you could be called. Now there are a lot of times when you're not called, not for an understudy or a swing. You're always there. But for the most part, you could count on not having to be there every day, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We had a matinee on Wednesday, so usually we didn't have any kind of rehearsal on Wednesday. So yeah, the shows the only time the shows ever stopped, obviously during the pandemic, there was we would be snow. I'd have friends who were snowed in and couldn't get out of the airport, but we still had a show. We would still have a show. There was one time when we didn't have a show when there was a possible hurricane. I couldn't believe they actually canceled the shows then, and it turned out it wasn't so bad. But other than that, 9/11, the pandemic, and one time for a hurricane were the shows.
When did Phantom open on Broadway?
January 26, 1988. I know that very well because they just celebrated their 35th anniversary. It was quite a big deal. And they're closing.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I heard
shocking to some of us. We thought they'd go another 5 years.
Okay, yeah, I heard they pushed back the closing date because they started selling a lot more tickets.
And there's a rumor that they're still, but they're saying it's firm now. April 16th is the closing. But those of us who are alumni have not heard what is happening. Even our friends who are still in the cast, the current cast members, don't know what's happening. They're going to do a 5 p.m. show. That's all I know is the show will be at 5 p.m. I believe it's on a Sunday. So I'm assuming big party afterwards. And I'm waiting for my invitation.
I'm sure.
But I those of us who are no longer in New York need to make plans. We either got to stay with friends, get a hotel, get a flight, whatever, So I'm hoping they'll let us know soon,
So how long had you been with the show when the first time you actually sang Christine?
I really, one of these days, need to sit down and figure out, but I started in 94.
Okay.
I started in 94 in the spring. And I had a little bit of time off in there, and I sort of count all of my Phantom time because I did the show also in Switzerland. I was there for a year doing Das Phantom der Oper, although we did do 2 shows a week in English. And we actually didn't call it Das Phantom der Oper. We called it the Phantom of the Opera, even though we sang auf Deutsch. So I did that for a year, and I came back from there, immediately went on to the national tour as the full-time Christine, not the understudy. In Switzerland, I was also not an understudy, I was Christine. Okay. And then I did the tour for about 16 months, or maybe it was 14 months back then. And then I went right back into the Broadway company for another 8 months. And then I had maybe a couple of months off, and then they called me from Toronto. And then the Toronto company, I went in for 3 months maybe, so they were closing that company.
How many different
I was always
were
Christine.
there?
Oh, I couldn't even tell you how many companies. I can tell you I was in 4 companies. But I can, right now there's an Australian company, new Australian company. There is currently the West End is still going strong, as far as I know, Broadway. But we had 3 national tours at one time in this country.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Oh, wow.
Fully booked, always, packed. And then one of those tours became the San Francisco company that ended up moving and staying in San Francisco. It started out as LA, and then it was San Francisco. And then there were 2 that toured, and I was on one of those tours. Then there was...
Excuse me. Are the touring companies going to keep going after the Broadway?
Right now, there are no
closes?
tours.
Oh,
There's
there are no
nothing
tours.
but Broadway Phantom,
Okay.
and that's over April 16th.
Okay.
So it's kind of shocking because there always has been for the past 35 years. 35 years!
Yeah.
I mean, that's most of my life, There's been Phantom. So it's really crazy to think. But I predict...
Everything always comes back.
I predict it's going to be very soon that it comes back. A lot of times revivals don't happen for at least 10 years, right? I predict 3, which is a really short turnaround, because I think I feel like the reason for this closing now, they weren't getting the money in, of course now they are, but they want to refresh it. They want to let a lot of cast members go who have been in there for a long time. They want to let those people go, and they want to make everything cheaper. So they're going to reduce the size of the orchestra tremendously, and they're going to reduce the sets and make that much easier to move around, and the costumes, they're going to make, everything's going to be less. Most people aren't going to notice, but the diehards will notice.
Okay.
And there'll probably even be less cast members.
Yeah, I guess that's a show you can vary the cast fairly easily with the number of
Well, it's funny because
dancers and so
one of
forth.
my friends, and like I said, I became a swing. So if you don't know what a swing is like an understudy, but they go on for all the ensemble roles. So I was a swing in a show also called The Pirate Queen, which was written by the same guys who wrote Les Mis. So we were shocked that we weren't a huge success because we thought we were going to be the next Les Mis. Is she showing up on that there?
Yeah, she's
Okay, she's very good.
Very good.
I'm not usually one of those divas that sits around with the dog, but she's pretty good. But anyway, so a swing covers ensemble tracks. So when I did The Pirate Queen, I covered 10 ensemble tracks, ensemble singers, and some of them were also dancers. And then I covered one of the major roles, Queen Elizabeth. The first was the role that I covered. So you have to know a lot of stuff. And then in Phantom, I was an internal swing. I was also a vacation swing on that tour for a while. So I knew all the roles, plus I also covered Christine Carlotta and Madame Giry. This is my second time back in the show. So I'd only gotten as far as my Toronto when you asked me about how long. I took a little bit of a break from the show, then I came back years later, and I was able, as a little bit more grown up, take on those other roles. And then I could sort of pass for the Christine still because of the lighting and the wigs and everything. I could sort of get away with playing an 18-year-old still, as you kind of do in the opera world. So anyway, so when I became an internal swing, so an internal swing means someone who's always in the show doing a track, but still can cover and pick up, maybe she just does this one walk-on role and this walk-on role, because you have to do what we call a cut show. So the swing, who's not usually in the show every night, has to go on for, say, another track. Well, then there's another female out. And it could, if it's a principal, then I might go on as that principal role. But if it's another female role, then I have to cover, still doing all the other stuff that I usually do. So I might have to also do this one part that has one line or two lines or something. So when they realized, oh, we can do this cut show with less actors, so they don't have to pay as many people. So that's why I predict that that it will be.
How many people were in the cast?
I believe when you count the swings, there are about 36 people in the cast, which is big for a Broadway cast, and about 26 or so in the orchestra. Then you have wardrobe and stagehands. Also, there are a lot of people backstage, and I think when and if you get to tour back, hopefully we'll get to do that again soon. With COVID, you haven't been able to get backstage, but I used to do a lot of backstage tours, and a lot of times, and I was too surprised when I first went up there at how small the stage is and how little space there is backstage. Because when you're on tours, when you're on national tours, and like our Peace Center here in the upstate, is pretty big. There's a lot of space back there, a lot of space, but we don't have that space in Broadway houses, most Broadway houses. The Majestic Theater, where Phantom still is right now, is one of the bigger houses, but a lot of them are very small, and so there's not a lot of space backstage, so it's surprising.
Okay. So when you're doing this day to day, every day,
You mean during a show?
yes, ma'am,
Mm-hmm.
while your show's going on,
Right.
what's your normal day like?
Okay, I've had that question quite a bit. So a lot of times I'm rehearsing, again, because I was when I was the principal Christine, though, I didn't have to rehearse as much because I'm doing that role every night, and I didn't cover anything else. I was just the Christine. So on those days, so I'll go with that first. So most of the time I was the principal Christine, I was on tour. So first of all, rest is a very important thing. Not talking a lot. So I definitely did not have any other job, especially when I was on tour. What are you going to do? I would take in sights of the town wherever we were. I would try to see, museum. A lot of times I was doing interviews with the local press, or even the local press for the next city.
Okay.
So I did have days like that. I would be at the gym, so I was taking care of my body. I was, eating right and doing all those things, and just, resting. And going out sometimes to lunch with someone who would call me and say, "Hey, I took hits from your mom." So it seems like, oh, wow, you didn't have to do a lot. Well, I had to make sure I was in tip-top shape. So you're kind of, in a way, like an Olympic athlete,
Sure.
Now, on the other hand, and that was on tour, so there's not a lot that you could do. When I was in Switzerland, we weren't touring. I was there in the same place every day, and then I was doing what we call the alternate Christine. So I didn't have to be on every night, but I had to be ready to be on. And I would do dance class every day with the dancers, as much as I could do. I don't claim to be an ABT, American Ballet Theater dancer, but I would do everything I could do every day with them. I would be in the gym, and I would be, practicing, vocalizing. We would do recitals. We would do benefits, to keep our chops up, because when you're just doing one show all the time, you're not flexing those other muscles. So we would do things like that. But in New York, it was different. New York, because that was my home. Of course, I went to church on Sundays. I went to other auditions. I was in rehearsals a lot. I would be at the gym. I would go to the grocery store, just like anything. And then what might be a little different, and what's very different in my life now, is that when I would get home from the show, which was usually around 11, I'd walk my dog. I had another dog at the time too. And then I'd be up for a little while. I'd be up till 1 sometimes too.
Oh yeah, it's kind of hard to wind down.
You gotta wind down, yeah. And it's like anybody that gets off work at 5 o'clock, they don't go to bed at 6. Yeah. If I got home at 11, I don't go to bed at 11:30. So I would be up watching, whatever I taped on the DVR or the VCR back then, or the Tonight Show or whatever, just unwinding. And occasionally, yes, we would go out after the show. So some people think that it's a life of, going out every night after the show. When you're in the show night after night, you have to take care of yourself.
Sure.
But occasionally, yeah, people would come up to visit, and I'd go out with them. And Saturday nights, usually we were off on Sundays in that particular show. Saturday nights, I might let myself go a little bit later and have a second cocktail, but otherwise you're taking care of yourself.
How long would it take you to get ready? I mean, what time would you have to be there? How far up before
at the theater
time?
Well, it depends. For me, depended on the role I was doing. So if I were doing an ensemble track, I would usually get there 7:15. You have to be there half hour. Half hour. If you're not there, they're calling the swing or the understudy. So, and a lot of people, especially the guys, didn't need that much time to get ready. So I did a lot of warming up at home because it's, again, smaller space, so it's hard to find a place to warm up. In the Majestic Theater. On tour is a little easier to find a spot. But when I was Carlotta has a lot more involved makeup, a little big makeup, almost very Cleopatra.
I've seen Phantom 3 times.
Oh, so you know, okay, yeah, and so that makeup was more involved. So I would always get there an hour before the show for Carlotta, plus I was vocalizing, and you just want to be in the space. For Christine, I did the same thing. Even though the makeup's not as big for Christine, I just wanted to be in the space. I also did a lot more of a physical warm-up with Christine because the first time you see Christine, she's a ballet dancer. So I would do a little bit more of that as well. And but when I would do cover, of course, you never know, you might be going on, but sometimes I would get there at 7:30. But 7:15 because, and I had more hair back then, but all this hair I'm showing you, if you're just listening, I had to do what we call pin curls. And you roll it up around your finger, and then you have to do 2 bobby pins all around your hair. Some people, it was even harder if they had shorter hair. And then you put a wig cap on top of that, and your microphone goes on top of that, and you pin that in. And that would take a lot of time to do the hair. So even though if I wasn't on for Carlotta, because she had the heaviest makeup, I didn't have a whole lot of makeup to do. The hair. So I want to get there 45 minutes.
Do they have to do a sound check every day, or do they just assume
They
it's gonna
do
work?
that on, the sound person just does that. So they test all it's down to a science.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In the beginning, I'm sure they did. In fact, we did in the Pirate Queen. We also did a fight call every night for the Pirate Queen. I wonder what would have happened had that show gone on longer, because do I have to do a fight call every night? But you make sure you go over that for safety reasons. So now, for Phantom, and I'm sure it's the same way right now, if you walk in a little early, you'll hear the sound person testing certain things. So we do not have to do that.
Okay.
On tour, however, we would do one rehearsal before, sort of a run through, and we had to do sound, and we would do some costumes. Because there were a lot of times people were local costume, most of the time, except for the Christine. Most of the dressers were local. So they would have to practice the costume changes. But we would do sound.
How long did it take the Phantom to get into makeup?
That also got down to a science. There's a book somewhere, I used to have it, a coffee table book that would tell you, he was there for 3 hours, and they used to have a contact, that got cut. But I think that the Phantoms got there about the same time we did, maybe an hour and 15. He is the only, and I say he, one of these days there might be a female Phantom. Maybe I'll be, that's the only role I haven't done. He's the only one who his makeup was done for him. The makeup artist was there to do. The rest of us, Carlotta, even like the Raoul had very heavy makeup in the beginning. There's the fops, if you where they emulate, or there's like a 17th century opera scene, and there are fops in that, and that's a lot of makeup. Those actors had to learn how to do it. So the makeup artist will show you a couple of times, you practice, and then after that you have to do it yourself. Okay. That's very different in the opera world, because for the most part when I have worked with opera companies, they have a makeup artist come in and do your makeup, which is nice, but this is 8 shows a week, so you gotta learn how to do it.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, did you, out of 8 shows a week, how many did you get to take off, or did you get to take off?
Well, if you are Christine, there is a 6 and a 2 split.
Okay,
that's the only character in that show that gets to split. But in every other person did 8 shows a week. So with Carlotta, which is crazy, 8 shows a week, that high E, I did it. I know. In Switzerland, it was a little different. They were able to get an alternate for the Carlotta and the Piangi, which is the operatic tenor role. But that was unusual. Again, with the union sort of dictate certain things. And it was because of Sarah Brightman that there were always 2 Christines, because she set it up that way. So a few years after Phantom opened, Victoria opened, and that was with Julie Andrews. And she would take 1 show off a week. So there was always, she only did 7 shows. But for the most part, even the big star does 8 shows.
Okay. And on those days when you have 2 shows, that's a lot of
do
work.
2 shows, yeah. You get into a rhythm with that too. Now in Switzerland, I did the matinees. We just kind of set it up that way. But it got to the point, I think, with Phantom on Broadway, where it was easier for the Christine, sometimes coming in from New Jersey, like she'd rather stay and get her and have a whole night off, like Thursday night or whatever was the alternates night, rather than have to come in for the matinee and leave, that way she had a whole night off. Okay. And didn't even have to come in unless the other Christine was out.
So you sang Christine for a long time, then you sang these other 2 roles. How long total were you with?
I never did get to finish answering that question, because we got on a. So I would say it's at least 10 years total. So between I went Broadway, Switzerland, national tour, Broadway, Toronto, national tour, Broadway. I ended up on Broadway. So I ended up where I started. So it's about, all told, 10 years, maybe a little more, but from 94 to 2012. So it's over an 18-year period, but I didn't do a solid 18 years, but I feel like I did in a lot of ways. But I got to do some other things. I moved to LA for a little while, kind of focused on TV and film, and still did the opera thing for a little while, and did some other shows, did a lot more Gilbert and Sullivan, did this show that Bublé and Schoenberg wrote, the guys who wrote Les Mis, did a lot of concerts, and a lot of times in the concerts, I'm still, to this day, asked to do a lot of Phantom material. So it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving.
I know.
More or less. You couldn't look at it that way,
This might be a dumb question, but did you ever get tired of it?
Well, I had a feeling that question has come up many, many times. Okay. Here's what I say to that. So, in fact, we did with my theater company that we've started, South Carolina Repertory Theater. 2021 was the first summer that we were kind of able to come back to the theater at all. We did outdoor venue here in Travelers Rest. It's called Trailblazer Park, and we did Midsummer Night's Dream. So we did Shakespeare in the Park, because I always wanted to do Shakespeare in Trailblazer Park, and then we did a show that I helped conceive called Phantom in the Park. So basically, it was a concert version of Phantom, because I can get away with that with the union. And I brought a lot of my friends who had done the Broadway production. So it was a very small, shorter version of it. I do not get tired of doing it when I'm doing it. I sometimes get tired of hearing it. Okay. So if someone is singing the music of the night and I'm not being paid or to be in the concert, to be the Christine, I don't want to hear it. But only that one. For some reason it's that one. I think because the Mirror Bride, remember me talking about the Mirror Bride? That's the ensemble track I first did, and usually, and certainly in the beginning, that is the Christine understudy. So has to stay on stage as a mannequin. So you're in the mirror as basically a mannequin. So you have a mask on, but you're a real person back there in the wedding dress. And you have to stand perfectly still for the whole scene, the music of the night, and what comes after. And you have one little move that you do. You become this bride, that mannequin that falls over and scares Christine. And then you have to go to one other position and be perfectly still for the rest of the scene. So that's why I have a little PTSD about that scene. Like, I don't hear that music. But if I'm doing it, I'm not tired of it at all, because there's an energy from the audience. People love it. And you're actively playing the role and playing the story.
Sure. Yeah. I've had people tell me, that you may be doing it for the 1000th time, but it's, first time for somebody.
It's always the first time for somebody in the audience, and I have a responsibility to that person, because that could be a little 8-year-old kid like I was the first time I went to Broadway and fell in love and said, I want to live here one day and be on Broadway. And my mom said, in 20 years somebody has to, why not you? So it was almost exactly 20 years.
You mentioned earlier about the thing with your shoe in the opera. Did anything weird ever happen in a Phantom performance?
So many things. We don't have enough time. We might have to do a part 2.
We got nothing but time. Really.
I'm like, I do have to pick up the kiddo from school, but no, we're good. We're good. Yes, many things. In fact, there was probably something with a shoe. There were a few times the chandelier didn't come down. The chandelier is supposed to dramatically come down and almost hit Christine. And you have to, as the actor, stay there and watch that chandelier. It's supposed to be kind of like a deer in the headlights. And wait for Raoul, my love interest, Raoul, to come and save you from the chandelier, because you're just sort of... But there were a lot of times where it didn't come. And I knew when it was supposed to come, because we had a cue, and I'm like, waiting, and you're supposed to be screaming at some point. You had to make something up because the chandelier didn't come. I fell once in the scene Masquerade, and if you know Masquerade, everybody is on stage and everybody is dancing, and it's all over the place. There's so much activity going on there, and so at least it was a fun scene at the beginning of it anyway, the beginning of Masquerade, so I could get up really quickly.
I actually watched it on YouTube last night to try to refamiliarize
myself.
Yeah.
So you see there's a lot of choreography. Yeah. A lot. And believe me, I learned all those roles too. I got up really quickly from that, and I was able to chuckle a little bit from that one. But there was another time I fell in the big dress for the All I Ask of You, the rooftop scene. And I can't remember exactly the situation, but the Raoul had to pick me up off the floor because the costume was so heavy and there was just no graceful way to get up, and that was not a funny situation that you could sort of laugh off. I can't remember how we did it, but we made it work. So I fell then. There were times that the boat doesn't go because the boat is remote controlled. A lot of times for me it happened when it was the last scene. So it was kind of funny because the Raoul and I would have to get out of the boat and walk across the water, swim, to get off stage. So that happened several times. I'm trying to think, I smashed my finger, ended up in the hospital, but I finished the show. So there was a time in Toronto where at that location or that venue, the boat was really close to the cement wall, and I wasn't supposed to be on that night. I was the alternate there, so I was called very last minute to go on. Even though I had to be in the building all the time, I didn't expect to be on that. It was Friday the 13th too. And so I remembered from my other 2 productions where the boat, I have pretty long fingers, and I could rest my hand outside the boat, on the railing of the boat. In this production, I needed to bring them in a little bit, because again, it was really close to the wall, and I had forgotten. Because it wasn't that I was on sort of like a robot, but just that part of me just kind of forgot. And I got my finger smashed up against that wall. And the Phantom of the time, his name is Jeff. He was, if anybody out there's listening, he was Jeff the Mannequin on a children's show years ago. Anyway, he didn't know what to do. He was like, what do I do? And I just yelled at that point because we were way in the back of the stage and the music's so loud they couldn't hear me. My mic was off. I said, just keep going. And I pulled my hand out between the boat and the cement. And then I almost fainted on stage, which is interesting because Christine's supposed to faint.
But you're supposed to get back up.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember a stagehand in the very 3-second blackout came out and brought an ice pack for me. I was like, what am I going to do with this? I can only have it for 3 seconds. So I finished that scene, went back to my dressing room. Somebody had already asked, is there a doctor in the house, I guess? And a doctor came back, pumped me with Advil. There was no, because the other Christine was out sick. And they didn't have another understudy. They're always supposed to be an extra one. So they said, can you do it? And then my friend who was the union rep said, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. I said, I can do it. So I finished the show and then went to the emergency room in downtown Toronto. That was not fun. Where I got some kind of stomach virus from whatever was going on there. But then, so that was on Friday the 13th. The Saturday matinee, the other girl was still not feeling great, and I said, I can't. Can she do the matinee? I can do the evening, but I've got to rest. Because I was in the emergency room until 4 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, that was an incident. Are you sorry you asked?
No, it's I think the behind-the-scenes stories are what make these things interesting.
Yeah. There are some out there that aren't true. Okay. There was this weird rumor going around for years that once I got out of the boat, and it was with my friend Brad, who was probably the Phantom I did it with the most because we learned it together, and that I sneezed on his hand. And I've tried for years to dispel this myth. I might be writing a book. That was not me. That did not happen. I never sneezed on my co-star.
Hey, there's one thing I always wondered. There's the one scene where the Phantom and Christine are going across.
Yeah.
Is that a fake Phantom?
I wouldn't say fake. It's a double.
It's a double. That's what I mean.
There are 2 doubles.
Okay.
Remember when I told you sometimes I would have to add something to my track when I was in internal swing?
Okay.
That was so weird for me because one time I had to be a Christine double that I had never done before because it was actually a ballerina track. But because they knew I had the wig, I had the costume, Christine, they had me do that. So what happens, and there's a reason for it. If you know the show at all.
I just think it's just a matter of timing. They don't have time.
Timing is the issue. As much as there is theater magic, So the actual actors playing Christine and the Phantom go through the mirror, down a couple steps, and then immediately go to a ladder to climb up to what we call the travelators. So it was sort of the image of going down, down, down into the bowels of the opera house. So the first doubles that you see on way at the top are their doubles. And it's usually 2 dancers who have the costumes. Then they come and meet the actors playing those 2 roles. So that's what happens there. There's another one where they're going down steps on the Broadway, in the Broadway company. So the first ones you see are also doubles. So there's 2 sets of doubles.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of thought that was probably the case. But oh wow, this has been great. I still have a lot of stuff, but I don't want to take all your time. Just tell us, kind of summarize what you've done, post Phantom.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I wanted to mention,
now.
if you're able to see this, so on February 15th, hopefully, if not, don't worry, there are more. But on February 15th, I'm doing something called Bryant's Broadway, which is a new series that I'm doing in conjunction with an organization in San Francisco, or right outside San Francisco. And where I talk about and sing works from very famous teams, Broadway teams. So this February 15th is going to be Rodgers and Hart, especially for kind of this month. So there'll be a little My Funny Valentine and some other things. And then next month is Candor and Ebb. It's usually the 3rd, in this case it's a shorter month, the 3rd Wednesday of every month, and it's at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. But again, you can watch it from anywhere. So I'll give you that link so you can tell your listeners. But you can also follow me on all the socials. I'm on all the socials, and I try to put all that out there. So the theater company, again, that my sister and I founded is called South Carolina Repertory Theater, SC Rep. Last year we did the 12th Night, which is Shakespeare. We try to put music in there. We're trying to do some musical adaptations or concert versions of shows. We did do Into the Woods in Spartanburg. So our first production we actually did at USC Upstate. I primarily teach voice. I can teach very, very beginning piano. But I primarily now teach voice here in my home studio where we are. If you're looking, this is the baby grand back here that I acquired. And it's a very nice space that I have here right near Furman University. I've taught at Converse and Anderson University in the last few years. I still do master classes a good bit at universities around, and I'm here to do I do concerts. With sometimes in Myrtle Beach, but all over the place, not just Myrtle Beach, but Philadelphia, anywhere they'll have me come. And I will sing Phantom material if I must. I have no problem. I know it pretty well. But again, I love singing anything from Mozart, Puccini, to Jason Robert Brown, who's one of my favorite newer composers, Pasek and Paul. Those guys are pretty cool. So I'll be talking about those in this series that I do. So would love for people to reach out and
just tell us your website.
My website is KimileeBryant.com. So, and also my name is pronounced Kimilee like Emily. I have to remind people that because it's an unusual name, but it's Kimilee Bryant, BRYANT.com. The name came from Kim Lee. My mom kind of made it up. So I always tell people don't double the consonants. One M, one L.
Hey, well, thanks so much for taking time to talk to me today. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for and Gypsy.
Thank you, Gypsy.
Our special silent guest.